Human leaned close to calm an alien girl's tremor. What her culture considered it melted him quietly. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's get back to our main character. John Carter stood in the dimly lit room, observing Zyra, the alien girl, trembling in front of him. She had been a part of the research team for a while now, but this was different. Zyra wasn't like the others he had met. The way her body was shaking, almost as if she was caught in a violent storm, was something John hadn't seen before. He could see the tension in her face, her hands pressed tightly to her chest, as though holding herself together. The tremors didn't stop, and neither did the look of quiet desperation in her eyes. John, a seasoned communicator, had worked with countless extraterrestrial beings. He was trained to understand their ways, their customs, and their fears. But this was something entirely outside his realm of understanding. He stepped closer to her, instinctively wanting to comfort her, to ease the suffering he saw in her trembling form. His hand reached out, hovering just an inch from her shoulder. He wasn't sure what would happen, but he felt compelled to try. As his fingers gently brushed against her skin, the tremors slowed. Zyra's body grew still, but it wasn't just her physical reaction that struck John. There was something more profound at play here, something tied to her culture. He could feel the moment her body stopped shaking, as if her very soul was exhaling a long-held breath. The stillness that followed wasn't just the absence of tremors. It was as if an unspoken understanding passed between them. John didn't know what to make of it, but he could see in her eyes that she wasn't just calm, she was thankful. And he was frozen in place. His mind raced, trying to understand the implications of what had just happened. What had just been triggered by a simple touch? What did this mean for his understanding of alien cultures? John had been trained to approach every situation with professionalism, but this moment felt personal, almost intimate, despite the fact that they barely knew each other. The shock of it lingered in the air, thick with unsaid words. In the silence, John began to realize that the cultural norms between them, the very foundations of communication, were worlds apart. Zyra's culture was not like anything he had studied. He had touched her, yes, but something in that touch was more than just a physical action. He hadn't known it, but in the culture of Zyra's people, this simple gesture carried much more weight than he could ever have imagined. John stood there, still absorbing the weight of the moment. He had touched Zyra, and in that touch, something had shifted between them. The tremors, which had been overwhelming just moments ago, had disappeared. But it wasn't just the physical stillness that caught his attention. No, it was the change in the air, the sudden understanding that had passed between them, even though neither of them had said a word. John found himself frozen in thought, unsure of what to do next. Was this just a coincidence? Or had his touch meant something far deeper than he had ever expected? As he looked at Zyra, he saw that she was no longer shaking, but her eyes still held that same quiet intensity. There was something in her gaze, something that told him she wasn't just grateful, she was changed. She took a slow, steady breath, and for a brief moment, it felt like the room itself had taken a collective sigh. It was as though everything around them had paused to process what had just happened. John carefully stepped back, giving her space, but he didn't want to break the moment. He needed to understand more. Zyra, he said softly, his voice betraying a hint of hesitation. What just happened? Why did my touch have such an effect on you? Zyra's eyes flickered, as though she was debating how much to reveal. She had always been guarded, even when she first arrived on Earth. Her people, the Zyrans, were not known for being open with their emotions. To them, emotions were private, even sacred, and sharing them was a matter of deep trust. Zyra remained silent for a moment, her fingers twitching, slightly at her sides as if she was weighing her response. Then, in a voice barely above a whisper, she spoke. In my culture, she began, her words measured, physical contact, especially between a human and a Zyran, is not something that happens lightly. We, Zyrans, believe that touch carries with it a powerful transfer of energy. It is not just a gesture, it is a connection, one that cannot be undone. John's eyebrows furrowed. So, when I touched you, You calmed me, Zyra continued, her voice still soft, but the weight of her words clear. You didn't just stop my tremors. You removed a part of the pain I've been carrying. But you also. She hesitated again, her gaze shifting away. You invited something into yourself. Something I don't think you fully understand. John felt a chill run down his spine. He hadn't expected this. He had thought he was just offering comfort, something simple. But now, it seemed like his actions had far greater consequences than he could have ever imagined. I didn't mean to. He trailed off, unsure how to finish the sentence. But Zyra shook her head slowly. You couldn't have known. None of us did. Her eyes met his again, and this time there was something almost unreadable in them. But now, we must both deal with the consequences. John swallowed hard. He wanted to ask more, to understand the full scope of what he had done. But Zyra's expression made it clear that this conversation wasn't going to be easy. She wasn't ready to reveal everything, and for some reason, he felt that he had just scratched the surface of something much deeper. Still, the weight of her words hung in the air, and John couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning of something far more complicated than either of them had bargained for. John couldn't shake the weight of Zyra's words. The air between them had changed in an instant, and now, as he stood there in the quiet, dimly lit room, the feeling of uncertainty pressed against him like an invisible force. He had never expected something as simple as a gesture of comfort to lead to a moment like this. Yet here they were, standing on the edge of something far more complicated than either of them had anticipated. Zyra stood before him, her gaze still, holding that mysterious depth. She hadn't moved, but there was a tension in her that John could feel, even without touching her. It was as if she was bracing herself for something she knew was coming, something that neither of them could avoid. What do we do now? John asked, his voice barely above a whisper. The question hung in the air, heavier than the silence. Zyra took a deep breath, her chest rising and falling slowly as she processed his words. She had known this moment was coming. She had known the moment her culture's customs were violated by the simple touch of a human, things would change. But she hadn't expected the impact to be so profound. We wait, she said quietly, her voice calm, but there was an underlying note of uncertainty. We wait and see what the connection does to both of us. For me, it is not just a physical reaction. It is spiritual, a bond that ties us together in ways you cannot yet understand. John furrowed his brow, trying to grasp the depth of her words. A bond? He repeated, still unsure of the implications. What does that mean? Zyra's eyes softened, a flicker of something almost vulnerable passing through them. It means that whatever you felt when you touched me, whatever energy you absorbed, is now part of you. It is not something that can be ignored or undone. It is not a curse, but it is something you must come to terms with. John shook his head, still trying to make sense of it all. But why me? Why would my touch have such an effect? Zyra took a step closer, her gaze steady as she looked at him. You may not realize it, but humans have a unique ability. You are not like the other species we have encountered. Your energy, your emotions, they are more malleable, more open. It is part of your nature. John's mind raced as he processed her words. Was she saying that humans were different? That somehow, his species had the ability to affect her people in ways others couldn't? It didn't make sense. So what now? He asked again, his voice full of uncertainty. Zyra didn't answer right away. Instead, she turned away from him and walked to the small window of the room, her eyes fixed on the view outside. Now, she began her voice low, almost distant. We wait for the bond to grow stronger or fade away. It is not in our control. What happens next depends on how we both handle it. The more we resist, the stronger it will become. The more we accept, the easier it will be. John watched her silently, unsure of what to think. He had never been one to shy away from challenges, but this was unlike anything he had ever experienced. And if it grows stronger? He asked, a sense of dread creeping into his voice. Zyra's shoulders tensed slightly, but she didn't turn to face him. Then we will have to deal with it together. There is no other choice. The room seemed to grow colder, and for the first time since they had met, John realized just how much he didn't know. Zyra, despite her calm exterior, was just as uncertain as he was. They were both standing on the edge of something unknown, something neither of them could predict. But one thing was certain. Whatever happened next, they would face it together. The connection between them was already deeper than either of them could have imagined, and now they had no choice but to navigate it, one step at a time. John stood in the quiet room, the weight of Zyra's words still hanging heavy in the air. The connection between them, this bond she spoke of, was unlike anything he had ever experienced. A simple touch, an innocent gesture to calm her trembling, had unleashed something neither of them fully understood. Zyra had said it was not a curse, but there was no denying the uncertainty that now enveloped them. He couldn't stop thinking about what she had said. The more we resist, the stronger it will become. The more we accept, the easier it will be. Her words echoed in his mind, a constant reminder that whatever had been set in motion could not be undone. The room felt smaller now, as though the space between them had shrunk, the air thick with the unspoken tension. Zyra had returned to the window, her eyes fixed on the outside world, but John could tell she was not truly seeing it. She was lost in her thoughts, just as he was. He stepped closer, his footsteps barely audible on the floor. "Zyra," he said, his voice hesitant but steady. "What happens if we can't accept it? If we can't handle it?" She turned slowly, her expression unreadable. Her eyes met his, and for a moment, the silence between them seemed to stretch infinitely. "Then we risk it consuming us," she replied softly. "The bond becomes a force we cannot control. It can tear us apart if we fight it too much." John's stomach twisted at the thought. The idea of something so powerful, so uncontrollable, was terrifying. But Zyra's calm demeanor gave him little choice but to trust her. She had lived with this for far longer than he had. "And if we accept it?" he asked. Zyra's lips parted slightly, but she didn't answer right away. Instead, she took a slow breath and stepped closer to him, her gaze softening. "Acceptance is not about surrender," she explained, her voice low and soothing. "It is about understanding the connection for what it is. It is not just a bond. It is a merging of energies, a union of two very different worlds. If we accept it, we open ourselves to the possibility of growth. But we must be careful. The bond can change us both in ways we don't yet understand." John absorbed her words, his mind racing with questions. Was he ready for this? Was he ready to accept something so profound, so foreign? He had always prided himself on his ability to adapt, to understand, to communicate with people, alien or human. But this felt like something beyond his grasp. "And if we don't?" he asked, his voice barely more than a whisper. Zyra's eyes darkened slightly, but she didn't seem angry, just resigned. "Then we risk losing ourselves. The bond will fade, yes, but so will everything that came with it. The connection will disappear, and so will the chance for understanding. It will be as if it never happened." The finality in her voice sent a shiver down John's spine. He realized that the stakes were higher than he had imagined. There was no going back. Whatever path they chose, they would have to walk it together. There was no turning away from what had already begun. John took a deep breath, his decision starting to take shape. He wasn't sure how this would end, but he knew one thing for certain. He couldn't walk away now. Not when there was a chance, no matter how small, that he could truly understand Zyra's world. "Then we accept it," he said, his voice firm, even though his heart was racing. "We'll face it together." Zyra's eyes softened, and for the first time, he saw something that resembled relief. "Then we begin," she said simply. And in that moment, John realized that whatever challenges lay ahead, whatever the bond between them would bring, he was ready to face it. Together, John took a deep breath, the air in the room heavy with the decision they had made. The bond, the connection between them, was now real. There was no turning back. He could feel the weight of Zyra's words in every part of him, the promise of something both terrifying and extraordinary. As they stood there, the silence stretched between them, not uncomfortable, but charged with anticipation. Zyra was calm, her eyes steady, but John could sense the tension beneath her composed exterior. She had been through this before, but for him, this was all new. "So where do we start?" John asked, his voice quiet but determined. He wasn't sure what he expected in response, but he knew he was ready to take the first step. Zyra didn't hesitate. "We begin by acknowledging the bond," she said softly. "Not as something to fear, but as something to understand. You need to feel it, to experience it fully. Only then can we move forward." John nodded, even though he wasn't sure what that would look like. He had touched her before, but this was different. He could sense the energy between them now, a quiet hum in the background of his mind. He reached out tentatively, not sure if it was the right thing to do, but feeling the pull all the same. Zyra didn't move, but he could see her reaction. Her breath caught for a moment, a flicker of something crossing her face. It wasn't fear, but something deeper. "It's okay," she said gently, as if she could read his hesitation. "Trust the connection. Let it happen." John took another step closer, his hand hovering near her. The air between them felt thick with possibility. Slowly, carefully, he let his fingers brush against her arm again, just like before. This time, there was no tremor, no sudden shaking. But he felt something shift inside him. A pulse. A warmth. It was subtle, but unmistakable. As his fingers made contact, a wave of emotions washed over him. It wasn't just the physical sensation of touch, it was deeper than that. He felt the weight of Zyra's experiences, her fears, her hopes, all of it rushing through him. It was overwhelming, yet somehow, it felt familiar, as though a part of him had always known it. Zyra's eyes closed for a moment, and John could feel her steadying herself. "Do you feel it?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. John nodded, though he wasn't sure he could put the feeling into words. It was as if a piece of himself had been unlocked, a piece he hadn't known was there. "I don't fully understand it," he admitted, "but I can feel it. I can feel you." Zyra opened her eyes and met his gaze. There was something unspoken between them, something that went beyond words. It was in the way they were connected now, the way their energies seemed to swirl together in a delicate dance. "That is the bond," she said softly. "It is not something that can be explained in words. It is something you must experience. The more you embrace it, the more you will understand." John's heart raced, but there was no fear. Instead, there was a quiet certainty. This bond, whatever it was, wasn't something to be feared. It was something to explore. He took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the connection still lingering between them. "So what happens now?" he asked. Zyra stepped back slightly, her expression thoughtful. "Now," she said slowly, "we learn. Together." And as the words left her lips, John realized that this was only the beginning. The journey ahead was unknown, but he wasn't afraid. Not anymore. Together, they would navigate this new path, whatever it held. The days following their decision to embrace the bond were filled with quiet exploration. John and Zyra spent time together, not talking much, but learning. The connection between them, subtle at first, had grown stronger. John could feel it now, a constant hum beneath his thoughts, a presence that was always there, just out of reach, yet undeniably real. It was as if part of him had shifted, a new layer added to who he was. At first, the sensations were disorienting. The emotions that Zyra had carried with her were intense, overwhelming even, and John often found himself struggling to make sense of them. Her pain, her fears, her memories, they all seemed to flow into him when their hands touched, or when their eyes met for too long. He could see the weight she had carried alone, the burden of her culture, of her past. Yet, there was also beauty in it, a depth that was impossible to ignore. One afternoon, they sat together on a low bench, the soft light filtering through the windows of their shared space. The hum of the connection between them seemed louder today, more present. Zyra was staring out the window, lost in thought. John glanced at her, unsure of how to bridge the growing distance between them. He had learned so much about her, but there was still so much he didn't understand. "Zyra," he said gently, "how do you live with it? With the bond, I mean. How do you carry all of that?" Zyra turned to look at him, her eyes deep and unreadable. She didn't answer right away. Instead, she seemed to be weighing his question, thinking it through carefully. "We don't live with it," she said finally, her voice steady but tinged with sadness. "We manage it. We suppress it. We hide it behind walls. We Zyrans are taught to keep our emotions in check, to never allow anyone to see our vulnerabilities. The bond makes that difficult." John nodded, sensing the depth of what she was saying. "But with me, it's different, isn't it? You don't have to suppress it anymore." Zyra's gaze softened, her lips curving into a faint smile. "Yes, it is different. With you, I don't have to hide. The bond, it makes us more open to each other, more real." John felt a strange warmth spread through him at her words. It was as if the bond was working in ways he hadn't fully realized. He had always thought of it as something that connected them, But now he saw that it was also a mirror. It reflected the truth they couldn't hide from each other. I don't know how to carry all of this, John admitted, his voice quiet. I've never felt anything like it. It's overwhelming sometimes. Zyra's expression softened with understanding. It's overwhelming for me too. But together, we can bear it. The bond makes us stronger than we are on our own. John looked at her, his heart swelling with a mix of emotions he couldn't fully process. He didn't know where this journey would lead them, but for the first time, he felt like they were truly in this together. What if it changes us, Zyra? What if we can't go back to who we were before? He asked, a hint of fear creeping into his voice. Zyra looked at him for a long moment, her eyes searching his face as if looking for something. We won't go back, she said softly. But that doesn't have to be a bad thing. Sometimes, change is necessary. Sometimes, it's the only way forward. John swallowed hard, the weight of her words settling into him. There was no going back, that much was clear. But maybe, just maybe, that was the way forward. Together, they would face whatever came next. They were no longer just two individuals crossing paths. They were something more. They were bound, not just by their shared connection, but by the trust they had placed in each other. The journey ahead was uncertain, but one thing was certain. They would face it together. John and Zyra had settled into an unspoken routine. Days passed with a quiet rhythm, their connection growing stronger, more natural, as they explored the bond that had changed everything between them. Each interaction felt like a step deeper into something neither of them could fully explain, yet neither of them felt afraid. The room they shared had become a small universe, where the outside world faded, and the only thing that mattered was the bond that connected them. But despite the calm that had settled between them, there was still an underlying tension. John had thought that once they accepted the bond, things would become easier, more straightforward. But he had been wrong. Every touch, every shared glance, brought new questions, new layers to unravel. Zyra, too, seemed to be struggling with it. Her usual calmness was now tinged with moments of vulnerability that she hadn't shown before. One evening, after a long day of trying to understand their shared connection, John found himself sitting across from Zyra, the silence between them heavy with the weight of unspoken thoughts. He had learned so much about her, the pain she carried, the strength beneath her quiet exterior, but there was still so much he didn't understand. Zyra, he said quietly, his voice breaking the silence. What happens if we can't control it? If it starts to overwhelm us? Zyra didn't answer right away. Her gaze was distant, her eyes searching something outside the room, as if she were trying to find the answer in the stars. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, she spoke. The bond, it's not something we control, she said, her voice soft but firm. It controls us, in a way. It shapes us, molds us into something different. John felt a chill run through him. The thought of something controlling them, shaping them in ways they couldn't understand, was unsettling. But we can't just ignore it, can we? He asked. Zyra's eyes flickered to him, and for the briefest moment, he saw something that resembled fear. No, she said softly. Ignoring it would be the worst thing we could do. It would consume us. John's heart sank. The idea of being consumed by something so intangible, so mysterious, was terrifying. Yet, despite the fear, there was something else, something that kept him from running. Something in the way Zyra had looked at him, in the way they had both chosen to embrace this unknown journey. So what do we do? John asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Zyra's expression softened, and for the first time, she seemed truly vulnerable. We learn to live with it, she said quietly. We learn to trust it, to trust each other. It's not easy, but it's the only way. John nodded slowly, processing her words. The bond wasn't something they could fight, wasn't something they could control. It was something they had to accept, something they had to trust. But as he looked at Zyra, he realized that it wasn't just about the bond. It was about them. Together, they had come this far, and together, they would face whatever came next. The uncertainty was still there, lingering at the edges of their lives, but John wasn't afraid anymore. They would navigate this new reality side by side, finding strength in each other. Whatever the bond held for them, they would face it together. And somehow, that made everything seem possible. The days began to blur together, each one feeling strangely similar, yet different. John and Zyra had found a rhythm, a kind of understanding that allowed them to move through their shared space without the awkwardness that had once been so present. The bond between them was stronger now, not just in the quiet hum that echoed between them, but in the way they began to truly see each other. There were still moments of uncertainty, times when John could feel the weight of everything they had to face, but there was a sense of calm, too. They were no longer just learning about the bond. They were learning about each other in ways that went beyond the connection itself. One evening, as the stars outside shimmered through the window, John and Zyra sat together in the same quiet space they had grown accustomed to. Zyra was focused on the swirling patterns of light outside, her thoughts distant, while John studied her, wondering what she was thinking. He had learned so much about her in such a short time, yet there was still so much that remained unknown. It was as if the more he understood, the more there was to discover. "Zyra," he said, his voice soft, careful not to break the fragile peace between them. "Do you ever wish things were different? Before all of this?" Zyra turned to him, her eyes thoughtful, searching his face as though weighing his words. For a long moment, she didn't speak, and John felt the tension of the silence settle between them. Finally, she spoke, her voice low but steady. "Sometimes," she admitted. "Sometimes, I wish things were different. I wish I didn't have to carry this burden, this connection that binds me to others, to you. It's not something I chose, but something that chose me. It's hard, sometimes, to live with it. But," she paused, her expression softening, "I've come to understand that it's a part of who I am. I cannot change it, but I can choose how I live with it." John nodded slowly, absorbing her words. He could see the weight of her history, of the choices she had been forced to make, the life she had been given. "I know what you mean," he said quietly. "There are things in my life, things I wish I could change, too. Things I never chose. But I think that's what makes us who we are, isn't it? The things we can't control." Zyra's gaze softened, and for the first time, John saw a flicker of understanding, as if she were seeing him in a way she hadn't before. "Yes," she said gently. "That's exactly it. We are shaped by what we cannot control, by what happens to us. But it's how we deal with it, how we learn from it, that matters." They sat in silence for a while, the room filled with the sound of their breathing, the connection between them a steady presence, but not an overwhelming one. There was peace in the air, a sense of quiet acceptance. John realized that Zyra had been right. The bond had changed them, but not in the way he had feared. It hadn't consumed them, hadn't torn them apart. Instead, it had opened them up, made them more aware of each other, of their vulnerabilities and their strength. The bond had brought them together, but it had also given them the freedom to choose how they faced the future. "I don't know what comes next," John said after a long pause. "But whatever it is, I think we'll be okay." Zyra's lips curled into a small, soft smile. "Yes," she agreed. "We will be." And in that moment, John knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together, with strength, trust, and an understanding of each other that nothing could break. The journey was far from over, but for the first time, he felt ready for whatever came next. The days grew longer, and the connection between John and Zyra deepened with each passing moment. What had once been an unfamiliar, even unsettling bond had now become an inseparable part of their lives. They had learned to coexist with it, to embrace it, even when the weight of it felt too heavy to bear. Despite the challenges, there was a sense of peace that had settled between them, a quiet understanding that no matter what, they would face it together. One morning, as the sun filtered through the windows, casting long shadows across the floor, John sat beside Zyra, looking out at the horizon. They had been talking less lately, the silence between them not uncomfortable but peaceful. It was as if they no longer needed words to communicate, as if the bond had become the language they spoke. "Do you ever think about the future?" John asked, his voice breaking the silence. Zyra glanced at him, her eyes thoughtful. She seemed to consider his question carefully before speaking. "I think about it," she said softly. "But it's hard to know what to expect. With the bond, with everything that has changed, the future doesn't look like it used to." John nodded, understanding her hesitation. The future had always been a mystery, but now it felt even more uncertain. The bond between them, once an unknown force, had become both a source of strength and a source of fear. It had changed them both in ways they still didn't fully understand. "I don't know what's coming either," John admitted. "But I'm not afraid anymore." Not like I was. We've faced a lot together already. Zyra's eyes softened as she turned to face him. You're right. We've come a long way. I think. I think we're stronger than we realize. John smiled at her, a small but genuine smile. I used to think I had to have everything figured out. But I've learned that sometimes, not knowing is okay. We don't have to have all the answers. Zyra tilted her head, as if considering his words. It's strange, isn't it? How the bond has changed us. How it's brought us closer in ways we never expected. John's smile faded slightly as he thought about it. Yeah, it's strange. But I think it's also what's kept us going. It's not just the bond itself, but what we've done with it. How we've learned to trust each other, to rely on each other. Zyra's expression softened even more, and for a moment, John saw something in her eyes that he hadn't noticed before, a glimmer of something like hope. We've learned a lot, she said quietly, but there's still more to learn. I think that's what keeps us moving forward. The knowledge that there's always more to discover. John leaned back against the wall, his gaze turning toward the window. Yeah, he agreed. The unknown is a little less scary when you have someone by your side. Zyra's voice was soft as she spoke, almost as if she were speaking to herself. I never thought I would find someone like you, someone who understands what it means to carry the weight of the bond. John turned to her, his heart swelling with a mixture of gratitude and affection. I never thought I would find anyone like you either, Zyra. They sat in silence for a while longer, both lost in their thoughts, but also content in the quiet presence of one another. The bond between them was no longer just something they had to endure. It was a part of them, a part of their shared journey. And for the first time since it had all begun, John realized that he wasn't just living with the bond. He was living because of it. The future was still uncertain, but now, with Zyra by his side, he knew that whatever it held, they would face it together. They would continue to learn, continue to grow, and continue to navigate the unknown, together.